Welcome to the Open Adoption Project. We're the Nelsons. I'm Lynette.
And I'm Sean. In today's episode, we have an interview between Mary and Lynette. Mary is an adoptee and shares her story of reunification. And I think that a lot of the times in the adoption world, we imagine all of the great, amazing, happy, joyful reunification stories. And Mary's story has a lot of twists and turns that were really unexpected for her. And I think that as we listen to her share her story, we can understand a lot about the importance of relationships, of connecting, and of just fostering the best relationships that we can. So she'll share a lot about her personal story and then answers a lot of questions about being an adoptee and about some of the experiences that she's had, mostly in the later part of her, or more recent part of her life. Anyway, such a great interview with Mary and Lynette, and we hope that you enjoy.
We are here on the podcast with Mary. Mary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, so thanks for having me.
To start off, can we have you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Sure. My name is Mary Herbert. I am a mom of 4. And I am sort of running into you and crossing paths because I'm an adoptee myself. And I went through a kind of wonky last 2 years or so. And so I've decided to sort of have a platform on Instagram to talk to other people about being adopted and adopting kids. And it's just like my favorite thing to do is to talk about adoption. And I just think it's really special to, create dialogue that's sometimes an uncomfortable conversation, and I think it's really important. So my kids are at school this year, and all of a sudden I have some time during the day. And so this is what I love doing. I love just comparing stories and talking back and forth about what adoption means to different people.
I love that. So important. Yeah. Where can people follow you on Instagram?
Yes. So I'm at Because Adoption. And that started, maybe like 8 months ago. And I was going through this sort of strange part of my story. And all of a sudden light bulbs were sort of going off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is because adoption. Like that happened to me because of this, and that happened because of that. And I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what we're going to call it. Like all these things sort of are encompassed because adoption. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, to start off, can we have you share your adoption story?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. I was an infant adoptee. And so I came to my adoptive parents around 5 weeks old. I am not international. I look very much like my parents. And I have one brother who is also adopted from the same agency. He's a little bit younger, 4 years younger than me. And life is pretty simple, pretty great as a kid. Adoption wasn't really a huge part of my life, which I think is a blessing and a curse, kind of. It goes both ways, hand in hand. I was a closed adoption, so we had no information about my family, my biological family. And as I grew, that became more and more of a curiosity of mine. So when I turned 18, I really started thinking about where I came from and roots. And it's just it's almost like a primal instinct. I like to tell people just to know where you come from. It's not any sort of negativity to my adoptive parents. It's just very much you need to know. Mm-hmm. And as I talk to more and more adoptees, not everybody has that, but I really did. And so that sort of started my drive, and my wheels were spinning in my brain, and I just had to know. So I started looking, and again, closed adoptions are really tricky. And I love that there's more and more open adoptions nowadays, because I think it's just so much healthier. Just personal, standpoint. That doesn't mean it's right versus wrong, but and I got married fairly young, and my husband knew I was adopted. This was just kind of a big part of my life I always wanted to find. And so I kind of went on a search. And I did it myself. The agency is closed, so they are sworn by documents, and court orders and all kinds of things. And I was still fairly young, so it wasn't like it had been 50 years. Some states, open them after a certain amount of time, but mine were closed. Mine were closed. And so I kind of started searching on my own, and it took a long time. I mean, years. And I'm not super patient. So I kind of came to the table and worked through it a little bit. And then I had to walk away. And I did finally connect to my mom, my biological mom, right before we were getting ready to start having kids. So we were talking about being pregnant, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know. I could die from pregnancy. Like, I don't know anything. Like maybe it could go horrifically wrong. And I have wanted to be a mom since I was about 7, when they ask you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And everyone wants to be a vet or a fireman and I wanted to be a mom. That was
That's
it.
So cute.
I just did, a big family. And I think now as I like sort of unpack my life, that probably has to do with adoption too. I envision like being a grandparent and having 4 kids and them having kids. And we just have this big family. And that has been my image that I think I'm going to get to, that I've always wanted to get to since I was very, very little. So I let my husband know that that's what we're doing. That's our plan. And he's like, okay, I'm on board. But the adoption was always there. I connected with her right before the same year I got pregnant with my first. And she's 11 now. So my kids are 5, 7, 9, and 11. And so this was right before kind of motherhood started. And I did get to have this wonderful conversation with her. It was about an hour. I took notes vigorously as if I was in college. And I just wrote because my memory is not great. I don't know if you find that with adoptees, the more you talk to them, you sort of find similarities. And I hear that a lot. We have the ability to sort of shut certain memories out and not, remember others. And so my memory's not great. So I knew I had to write everything down. And I still have that notebook. I look at it sometimes and, remember that conversation with her. And it was lovely. I learned a lot. And we got off the phone, and she said, this is so wonderful. Like, I can't wait to have a relationship with you. It's just so great. And so I hung up the phone thinking that's what we were going to do. And I picked up the phone the next day or later that evening just to call back, and we were supposed to talk again. And she did not pick up her phone. And, I thought, oh, it's a mistake. I must, have the wrong number. And I left a message, and, 2-3 days went by, and this was very clear, a brush off. And man, that was the beginning of this, secondary rejection where you just feel, man, did you trick me? I really thought here we were. And so for the next 6 years, I had 4 kids. In the next 6 years. And I would say twice a year, I'd pick up the phone and call or send a text message and just say, Merry Christmas, or I hope you're doing okay. I'm here if you're ready, or anything like that. I just wanted to be there for her. I knew this was probably something really hard for her. And I just wanted to be friends. I just wanted to, how can I help you? How can I make you feel better about this? And she never answered, ever. And it took another almost 7 years until we reconnected again. And I called one day, and she picked up on accident. It was very clear, she didn't realize who it was. And she was charming, very cordial, surprised, but very, stayed relaxed. It wasn't a hang up or anything panicked. And I let her know I was going to be up where she lived in a couple of weeks. And she said, oh, this is so great. And we'll get together. And so I went thinking we would. And, the story, she didn't come. And that was heartbreaking, again, with man, I really thought we were going somewhere here, and she just wasn't ready. And I really wish she had just told me I wasn't ready. That would have been something really hard, but it wouldn't have been the pull around, that maybe it's going to work. So for the first time, after she didn't show up, we were supposed to meet at a hotel and, a lobby somewhere safe. I mean, this could be anyone, right? And, I was angry. I left feeling upset, like this is it. I remember pulling away from the train station after she hadn't shown up. And I just said, this is the end. This is the end of the story. I can't do this. I have this beautiful family and I really need to concentrate on them, and it'll happen when it happens. And almost 2 years later to the day, I got a text message from her phone, and it was from her significant other, and he was letting me know that she was ill. And what do we do as women? What do we do as moms? We kind of revert back to that motherly, what can I do? Do you need a liver? Do you need a kidney? Do you need blood? Like, how sick is she? What do we need to do? How can I help? Like, does she have anyone? Does she have support? Where do you need me to be? And my husband kind of looked at me cuckoo for a minute, like, wait a minute, like, we don't even know her. And it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me. It was that this is my chance. I can get to her now, like, we're close again. Here we go. And, I start revving up the engine again of, we're going to build this relationship. This is going to be. And I hope sometimes when people listen to my story, they don't think, God, what a Looney Tune are you? Like, the woman didn't want to be around you. But there was something I just couldn't let go. I could not let it go. And so I felt like she was being dropped in my lap again. Like, here we go. Let's try again. And it had been, a few years. And right back into that motherly, how sick is she? What can we do? And so I spent the next couple of weeks every day speaking with her significant other and understanding what was going on with her and the diagnosis and her progress and, down to her medicines. And I spoke to her nurses, and I kind of got to know her through him for a few weeks. And one day she woke up and he said, she'd like to talk to you. She knows that you've been praying for her and talking to me, and she'd like to talk to you. I'm like, great. When? Let's do it. Let's do it. And so she was transferred back from the ICU. She had been moved to a hospital wing because she was in real severe condition, and she was now back into just sort of the general hospital floor. And so she could speak on the phone, and I felt like, here we go. This is going to be great. You're going to get better. And this is our chance. Like, God dropped you in my lap right now. This is going to work. And so we chatted every day, twice a day. I remember walking outside. I'm like looking outside, remembering, like, I would walk up and down my sidewalk, and hospital phones would close at 8, and I would call, at 7:50 and just make sure I got those last couple minutes with her. And she was progressively getting better. And she, you may think this is like a little cuckoo, but I sort of like fell in love with her over those 2 weeks. Like, now I really need her to get better. Now we have a relationship, and as small as it may be or as big as it may be, like, now I care for this woman, not just because of who she was, but because I know her now. I want to make sure she's okay. And so she came home one day, and I got a call. She was home, and I called her the next day, and she didn't pick up. And I just said, oh, come on, come on. And by this point, I had talked to her son on the phone. So I have this wonderful half brother, and he was 18, and I just adore him. We have a great relationship now, just to skip to the end. He's just a part of our family, and I love him. But he didn't know that I existed, and now he did. And so I called him and I said, what's going on? Like, I thought we were kind of doing good with your mom. And he said, oh, she's back in the hospital. And I have to tell you, there was a piece of me that was relieved that she wasn't blowing me off. I mean, that sounds awful, but to have gone through it a few times already, I just said, okay, it's a hiccup, but at least we're still in the clear. Her son's picking up, like, we're still good. And unfortunately, I spoke to her 3 or 4 more times, and she was going downhill pretty quickly. And, I remember our last phone conversation, and like, I felt like she knew it was the last. It was very emotional and very quick and sad. And it just, And then she went to sleep. And I got a call a day or two later saying they were moving her to hospice. And I said, oh my God, like, wait, I haven't gotten up there. I haven't seen her. And
Yeah, how
this is,
far away did she live from you?
she's about 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. But this was the time that COVID started shutting everything down. So you weren't allowed in hospitals. People were having babies without their spouses. There weren't enough masks for nurses. I mean, it was that weird time where people were opening doors with like their shirts, like nobody knew what was going on. And so there was one point before she went home where I thought I need to go up there because we didn't think she was going to make it before she woke up. There was a real unknown time for about 48 hours. And, my husband and I kind of talked it over and we said, God, the risk of going up there is high. She's already intubated and she's probably not going to make it. And then she did make it. And came home and then was back. And I felt like these were chances that were being given to me. And this was the last one. And I needed to get up there and I needed to see her face. And so day 2 in hospice, I got in the car and I went up and, looked my best because I had always envisioned we'd be in a coffee shop or, shoot, the visions were anything but a hospital bed. I had played it out so many times in my mind. And so I got there and she was asleep and I stayed. I don't think I went to the bathroom once. I didn't want to miss if she woke up and she stayed asleep. And that was a hard thing. In the moment, it felt like, I know this wasn't it, but in the moment, it felt like another rejection. Like, for goodness sakes, can you just open your eyes and see me? Like, I'm finally here. We're breathing the same air. Can you please? And I remember before leaving, I begged her, she's asleep. And I just like knelt next to her and I just said, like, can you just throw me a bone? I've waited my whole life. Can you just wake up and like know that I'm here? And she didn't, which is heartbreaking. But I came home and then the hard part is, you leave knowing that's the only time. And then we waited 10 more days and she was asleep for 10 days. There was no intervention. Hospice is very peaceful. They come in and brush your hair and talk to you. But there's no tubes or intubation. There's no feeding. There's nothing. You just kind of wait. And I got really comfortable with some of the nurses that were there that I had met. And so I called and checked on her each day a few times. Just how's she doing? Because the nurses, they know when, and they said, she's just waiting. We don't know why. She's just waiting. We thought it was waiting for you, but you've been here. We don't know. And so I think it was day 7. I sat down with my computer and just took a deep breath and opened up my email. And there was my 23andMe results. And I had done Ancestry and they had kind of just been sitting on the computer for a couple of years. I hadn't dug into them. And I had been talking to a woman who helped me kind of pull apart my results. And I had been waiting for those results to come back. I had also taken a 23andMe. So now I had 2 sets of DNA, so to speak. It's the same, but comparisons. And, there was a match to a sister that I had. And, I said, there's a mistake. There's no sister. And the sweet woman who was helping me was like, there's no mistakes. Like, there's no mistakes, you dumb. So I reached out and sure enough, it was a second child that she had given up for adoption and nobody knew except her mom. And her son didn't know. Her son didn't know about me either. So now there's a second one. And she emailed me back just confirming that. And then I called my brother who sat with her every night. And I just said, guess what? There's another one. There's 3 of us. This is amazing. And he couldn't believe it. And then the next day I opened the email and it was my sister, and she was writing me back just saying like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I just want to introduce you to your brother also. And I said, that's got to be a joke. Like, what do you mean? And so this was the third child she had given up for adoption. And so I called my brother again, sitting next to our mom, at her bedside, just waiting. And I just said, you're not going to believe it. There's another one, and he's like, this is, the poor kid, he's 18 years old. Like, what? But as these like new people came to surface, I mean, this is the big picture here is this legacy that she left. And, for him, if he ever needed us, here we are for him. And so the last day before she passed, there's actually 4 of us that she gave up for adoption, and they came day after day after day. I kind of learned about each of them. And, I called my brother and let him know each day that we found a new one, and they were right in a row. I mean, it was a crazy 72 hours. And we let my mom know on that last day that we had all connected and, found each other, and that it would be okay. And we all knew that, our brother, who's the only one she raised, would be okay. He's got 4 of us. And then she passed a couple hours later. She passed early the next morning. And so I believe, she waited and waited and waited for us to kind of find each other. And I think it would have been really difficult if that had happened had she been awake and had to answer all those questions of why and how. Yeah. I don't hear a lot of stories that, maybe 2, but I don't hear a lot of stories of 5 kids, in different places. And so anyway, I have that's sort of the last 2 years plus all the years of searching. Sort of it all kind of came to a head and had surprise after surprise. But it's tragically beautiful is kind of how I describe the story, because we found her, I found her, we all found each other, and then she left us, which is tough.
That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you found 3 other siblings. 2 of them were raised together.
Yes.
In addition to your half brother. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm number 1. 18 months later is my sister. And then 22 months later is my brother, and they were raised together. And then 20 months later is my sister. And then 12 years later is my half brother. And he grew up with our mom.
All right. Wow. Yeah, that's an incredible story.
I tell it and I have to remember it's not the norm, like it is for me, but it's bananas, when you
have you found other biological family, like extended family, any of your mom's family?
So my mom is adopted also, and it's a pretty hard dead end. We don't have her DNA, but we have all of ours. And I've gone exploring. I think I know where it leads, but it's been 2 years of me knocking down people's doors that may or may not have wanted to know who I was. And my husband and I sort of joke, like, hold on, take a break. Like, these are people's lives, and she's gone too. So that's a hard thing too, to reach out to someone and say, you're my grandma, and not have the mom, not have the middle. Yeah. I know my mom always wanted to know. It was a conversation we had. And so I would love to, understand that at 100%, but we may not know, and that's okay. That's okay with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to your childhood, what was the conversation around adoption like in your home as a child?
Yeah. So I grew up, we had books laying around. I have some of those books still, and they're so cute and dated, and just, I know there's so many out there now, but I think, in the 80s, there was probably like 5 books. There wasn't a lot of resources. But I remember sitting on my mom's lap and they read the book, however many times. So it was open. There was no secret. There was no, you're 7, I'm going to tell you now. It was just who we were. We came from someone else's belly and we came from my adoptive mom's heart. And she was always our real mom. There was nothing blurry about the lines, which I appreciated. But again, as I got older, it didn't really matter. It could have been this huge secret. I don't think it mattered how it was dealt with. I think it was dealt with appropriately for what everybody had their hands as far as like resources. I think, they explained it to us as best as they were instructed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you feel like your adoptive parents did well?
Probably that, it wasn't like taboo. It wasn't, and I think I probably have it a little bit easier than say an international adoptee or transracial adoptee. People wouldn't look at me and be like, you don't look anything like your parents. And that's so hard for children to hear. I've talked to children that just say like, it's so unfair. Like, I don't even like my family because I don't look like them. It's really hard. And we didn't go through that. And I feel really lucky, but that's a hardship right there. But it was, it was talked about. We celebrated it once a year, I think, until we were, I don't know, 8, it was a little kid holiday that we kind of talked about. And then it kind of wasn't an issue. I don't remember it early adolescence, teens. I don't remember it until I brought it back up at 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have any negative experiences in your childhood as an adoptee?
Again, my memory is like not great. I don't remember something negative, like off the top of my head. I have to tell you though, as I'm currently writing a memoir and kind of writing this story down, memories unlock that I've never seen before. And that's a strange phenomena that happens. I'm writing and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I didn't remember that experience. And some of them have to do with adoption. I remember a really strong one that has come up as I'm writing is, I remember holding my mom's hand as a little kid in a store. And I remember peering around a corner thinking my real mom might be standing there. And that was something that's really stuck with me because the curiosity and the wonder must have been there as a kid, even though it wasn't talked about openly. I don't remember having the conversations with my parents about it. But to have that memory surface where I was like stretching around the corner, like wondering, she might just be there. Maybe she's looking for me. So I wouldn't say negative. I would say probably sufficed, things I wanted to say. But it wasn't talked about often, more than just what I've mentioned.
And how interesting that as you're writing your memories down, more memories are being unlocked. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It really is. It's, I've seen a couple different ones and I have to kind of catch myself. Wait, was that real? Like you wonder if you're kind of imagining, but as I write, I sort of see things unlock and it's really cool. Writing has become very therapeutic. It's really neat.
That is neat. So you grew up with a closed adoption. How do you think this affected your experiences?
In regards to what? Like
in regards to how you felt about adoption?
I didn't really know that there was an open adoption. I didn't understand. I had one friend who was also adopted. Same situation. She lived in my neighborhood. She looked like her parents. It wasn't, we didn't talk about it. I just knew there was someone else like that. Two, actually, I had 2 friends. And, white family, white child. It wasn't talked about because it wasn't weird. It was just who we were. One of them is a very close friend of mine now, and we talk about it often now about how it would have been really helpful to talk about it and to openly discuss that. I mean, even in a joking manner, like bring some humor to the situation. Like, I'm not like my parents, or I am, but just to like openly talk about that we came from somewhere else is so healthy.
Yeah.
And I know not a lot of people would agree with me, but to not speak about it is, I mean, I think it would have been really helpful. And probably, I know this doesn't answer your question, but big milestones, just like I always kind of want to mention this, but big milestones like my wedding and graduation, and even like winning a soccer tournament, big things when you're a kid, you always wonder. So those of y'all that have adopted children, the child always wonders if that other mom, would be proud, or if that other mom knew, or maybe she's around the corner and like watched that soccer goal. There's always that, because it's unknown. And if it's closed, I mean, you don't even have a name or a body, a phone, like you have nothing. It's just an imaginary person. There were some big steps in when I was finding her, when I like first saw her name, and all of a sudden she was real. And then when you first hear the voice, you're like, oh my God, it's a real person. I mean, it's very strange when there's no information at all. So I know that didn't answer your question, but that's something, like, as a child, I almost wish that I had anything from her that just said like she was proud, or she knew what was going on, anything like that.
So it was a closed adoption, but also it was pretty close conversation growing up. I mean, about feelings and about,
Yeah, every time I would bring it up, it was addressed, and then that was it, the end. It was never like touched on. It wasn't, and I had like significant learning disabilities, and sort of like we jumped around schools, and I had some things going on in my life that were tricky. It wasn't all smooth sailing. And so it wasn't brought up in a way that related to what was going on in my life. It was only brought up if I was like, hey, did my mom have blonde hair? It was just like that. It wasn't unpacked. The layers weren't unfolded the way they probably should have been.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully that's something that's changing. I feel like the adoption community has changed a lot since then, and that's great.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's so many people in their 30s, 40s, 50s that are sort of in the middle of chaos right now, because DNA is out and these secrets are unfolding, and some Aunt Susie slipped up about your I mean, there's this like wave of chaos, I think, going on with my age adoptees right now, trying to kind of understand themselves, and it causes a lot of second guessing and self-worth, questions, and it's hard. It's really hard. So this open adoption movement, so to speak, it's almost like a correction of closed adoption, is wonderful. But ups and downs to that too. I think that can be very invasive to the adoptive parents also. And there's no book that says how you do it, and each one is so different. So that's hard. I've heard awful stories either way. It's just, there's no safe space. It's just, I think the more you're educated and the more the better equipped you'll be, for the bumps. There will always be bumps, no matter what, bumps in the road. It's never just a perfect. So
that's true.
Yeah.
All right. So what advice would you give to other adoptees who are searching for their birth family?
Probably the most important one is patience. This is not, it took me 14 years to connect with mine. This is not something that just happens. Sometimes it does, sometimes you get lucky and you take a 23 and there she is. But also, even if you find someone, I was just writing a post about this the other day, even if you find someone, take your time with, before you act. I think I probably made some mistakes in jumping into, new siblings or new aunts or uncles and wanting to know everything. But with my mom, like, time was really of the essence. Like, had I not plowed through all the obstacles, like, I could have missed her.
Yeah.
She could have passed and I would have never gotten to her. So, time, like, life is short. I really take that to heart, but think before you jump, because you know, these are other people's lives you're talking about. So it does take time though. It doesn't all have to happen at once. And just because it didn't happen this year doesn't mean it's never going to happen. I mean, like I said, when I pulled away on that train, I remember thinking like, this was it. This was the end. And, you know, it took 2 more years and then, you know, everything sort of happened. So patience it's very hard, but it, you know, I think keep it in mind.
That's good advice.
When you're looking.
So building relationships with your siblings as you guys have been reunified, what has that been like? Do you have any advice for other adoptees who are building these relationships with brothers and sisters that they've found?
Yeah, that's tricky too. I mean, kind of for the same reason is you don't know where they're at in their relationship, where they are. And I'm the only mom of the group. And I think that probably has a lot to do with it. I just think a little bit differently. Once you have your own kids, I think priorities shift. And again, the life is short sort of comes up and you have these people that are yours. And I think your mind is just so different as a mom. And I was just talking to one of my dear friends, the one I told you I grew up with that was also adopted. And she's recently reunified with some of her siblings. And again, I think if you jump in too fast, you know, you just don't know who they are. And it is instinct for us as humans, especially I think as females. I don't know if that's fair, but to jump in with open arms. And this is amazing. This is great. I mean, who wouldn't want someone extra in their life? It's not replacing anyone. It's a bonus. I mean, I feel so lucky to have extras in my life. And their relationships are, you know, each different. And again, there's no rule book or instruction manual to this. You know, everybody kind of does things at their own pace. I mean, I would love to have them all over for Thanksgiving and just enjoy each other and compare notes and understand each other's quirks and just talk all day. And that's just my personality. That's not everyone's personality. And I think you learn as you go. You say something or you plan something or you make that phone call that you've been waiting to make. And then you kind of have to roll with what results out of that motion that you've made. And again, patience, and there's a lot of forgiveness involved when you know, have a reunion with a sibling, a lot of forgiveness, because you might say something and they might go, wait a minute. And, you know, to be open with that, I think is really important when you're first addressing it, just to say like, this is uncharted territory. This isn't something that I've ever dealt with. So if I say something that, you know, you find to be like, please just show me some grace. I mean, both parties kind of need to have an open mind. And so I think that's important.
I think so too. I love what you said about wanting to just have everyone over at Thanksgiving. I feel like that's an oldest child kind of trait too. Just it's your oldest child trait, just wanting to organize everything. And that makes sense.
I'd love them all to be here, you know, but everyone has their own life. They all have their own parents and their own traditions. And why would we come down and hang out with you, you know? And so baby steps, you know, people's lives, just because you're ready to drop yours and invite them in doesn't mean, and that's not, you know, that's not terrible. That's also natural, you know?
Well, I love what you said about showing grace for each other too. That's an amazing thought and applicable for all of us, but I love the application and adoption.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Just a quick side question. Do you and all of your siblings who are also adopted live close to each other too? Relatively.
Within reason. Yeah. I mean, within 5 or 6 hours of each other.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Without giving too much information away.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Fairly close.
Yeah. All right. So if you could share one thing with every other adoptee, what would it be?
Oh, probably to stay true to what you believe you deserve. A lot of adoptees struggle with, you know, deserving, feeling like they deserve the best. Confidence is something I think we struggle a lot with. The rejection is tough. Even as an infant, some people that aren't adopted kind of look at adoptees and go like, what do you mean it was rejection? Like you were a baby, like you didn't know her, it's just something that is embedded in us. And between me and you and whoever is listening to this, I think that all adoptees deserve to know where they came from. It's just something I feel really strongly about. And there's a nice way to go about it and probably a not nice way to go about finding, them. And I think I was probably a mixture of both, as I powered through and, kept myself in the forefront of what I was doing. But I think just remember that in good time, again, the patience, but also don't sell yourself short as far as you deserve that. Don't say, oh, it's not going to work, or, oh, she doesn't want to meet me. Go another avenue. Like my mom passed away a year ago, and I'm still talking to people she went to school with and teachers that she had because I want to know her, and she's not here. And so I can't call her and talk to her, but I still deserve to know who she was. And that's going to help me just be an adult and me understand myself more. And so, I just last week, just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with a classmate, and she was in school with her the year after I was born. And it's fascinating because she could speak to her after she had given a baby away. I mean, so just because you can't get to, the main person, it's okay still to want to know and to go different avenues. Maybe not everyone would agree with that, but I think people deserve to know. It's helpful for us as adults, to fulfill that collective narrative that everyone deserves to have about their own life. To have holes in it is really hard, especially as you get older. Yeah. When you're a kid, when you're in your 20s, it's like, meh. But as you start to grow as your own person, I think it's really important to have all the facts that you can.
Absolutely. So you've been able to talk to other people from your mom's life and learn more about that whole picture. That's really neat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it takes a lot of digging and a lot of patience. Her classmates, I went to her obituary, and she was, again, like the story to me is very tragic, and she was sort of, she didn't have a huge support network from the get-go. And so there's 5 or 6 entries on her obituary, whereas for goodness sakes, when people die, now you feel like it's just all over social media and, just everyone pours out and there's GoFundMe. And, she very quietly left this earth, which is very sad. And, but there was one person that wrote on there, and I just said, you've got to know something. And so I just reached out and I just said, like, can you tell me a story about her? I'm her daughter. Like, can you tell me something? And most people, when you come at it at that angle, it's not, there's no malice. There's no, you're coming at it with a good heart. And, she told me she used to wear like a camel jacket and pink frosted lipstick. And I'm like, that's something I didn't know, and that little piece creates, fills another hole of something you didn't know about. So keep pushing through, because it's amazing when you start to get little pieces of her or of them. In all honesty, it's not super uncommon.
Yeah.
Like if you have the desire to find someone, that's what you do, and again, I hope that people don't listen and think I'm some sort of psycho that went on the witch hunt, but there's something inside adoptees sometimes that you need to know. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to think you're a psycho. No. I think that's a very natural instinct, and that makes sense. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I've gotten comfortable with thinking so.
Yeah, I agree. How do you think your experience of being an adoptee has shaped your perceptions of birth and parenthood?
Oh, good question. Good question. Well, first, if you go to my Instagram, I just did this post. I know this won't run, like you're not going to like post this podcast right away, but I just did this post about birth, and births are so triggering for me. You just get this flood of emotions that like all of a sudden I was sitting in my mom's shoes. I'm sitting in the hospital room. I'm holding this baby and I'm wondering, how can someone just hand over this baby? How can I give away my child to someone? And the hospital experience is a little bit different, was different for me than I think someone, I mean, again, I don't like to speak for other adoptees unless, I've spoken to them. But for me, I had this connection. I felt like I was connected to my biological mom in the hospital because I knew she had been in this place. She had held this baby and she had, I just felt like I was living her life for a little bit. And it's kind of why people, that are from other countries go to those other countries. You're like in their footsteps, like they visited this bar, they went to this school. It's sort of why you revisit. And so every time I had a child, not only was it triggering, but it was almost comforting to be in that hospital. Each time before I left, I didn't want to leave. We're getting ready to do the paperwork, and I start getting upset, anxiety about leaving. And because once you leave, that connection to your biological mom, at least for me, was gone. I left. I have my baby, which is the most happy day of my life. But also that wasn't her choice. And so all of a sudden you start floating apart again, in your delusional world of trying to relate to someone that you don't know, and so the hospital visits for me giving birth were extremely hard. I mean, beautiful, wonderful moments. I have this new baby and I was so lucky to go through it 4 times, which is ironic because, she gave 4 of us up, and that doesn't, fall short in the, irony category of this story. We both had 4 and 6 years. And that's, again, I think sometimes a little wink down from whoever's in charge, saying like, you'll figure this out later, you'll connect the dots later. So yeah, birth is pretty triggering for adoptees, just in general. When my mom passed away, a girlfriend of mine had a baby a couple weeks later. And I remember going over and holding that baby. And I just cried. I looked at this baby thinking like, how could anyone hand over their child, and she had gone. I couldn't ask her. I couldn't, I had all these new, that was a tough couple of weeks when she was gone and we had all these new people in my life. And, so birth, yes, that's a hard one for adoptees in my mind.
Yeah. What have you struggled with regarding adoption, and what do you wish other people knew or understood about it?
I would probably say, 2 questions. I wish people would acknowledge that there is some trauma in adoption, and it's not because of the adoptee's childhood. It's not. I had a great childhood. We did anything I needed. We had tutors and, we went on trips. I mean, I was not living in a box because I didn't belong to these people. I had this beautiful childhood. And so the trauma wasn't there as much as the initial separation from my mom. And just to acknowledge that there's great loss in adoption also. It is this beautiful, it's so beautiful, handing over a child to someone who can't have children or chooses to adopt for whatever reason. And I appreciate that beauty so much, but just make sure that you acknowledge the huge loss that woman is going through. I mean, the gratefulness is always there. I see these stories and they're so grateful. They're so grateful. They're so grateful, adoptive parents, for this biological mom, but just don't forget, that loss. And again, I think now it's not quite so. I think people are really becoming more aware now than it used to be, especially because the mom a lot. These open adoptions are just, the adoptive mom can call and just say like, "How are you? Like, how are you doing today?" Versus my parents who had a baby and couldn't even check on her, see how was doing. Because a lot of times these biological moms, they don't have the support at home. That's one of the reasons they give up these children, is because, so it would mean a lot, to have the adoptive mom call and check in. And so just remember, the other side of it, this beautiful family that you're growing also comes with great loss.
Yeah. And loss for the baby, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a separation that's traumatic, I think, for many children. Yeah.
And just to keep that in mind, like later in the future, I mean, it really wasn't an issue. I had 18 years of not caring I was adopted. And then all of a sudden, it kind of took over my life. I mean, especially now as an adult and as I became a mom of my own, there doesn't go a day, definitely not a week, that I don't think about it. And that's important to remember too. It's not just something that comes up on your birthday. Birthdays are hard, but it's not just that day, just be aware that that's also going on. Yeah.
What are your hopes for the adoption community? You're working on your Instagram site and you're writing a memoir. What do you hope that the adoption community can gain from hearing your experience, other adoptee experiences? Where do you hope we can get?
So through my experience and hopefully this book, if I get it done, for goodness sakes, editing is like the longest process ever. But I've come to understand that support systems for adoptees are just enormous. And you can find a lot of people on Instagram that are willing to tell you all about their adoption story. But I don't know if we talked about this, and you're more than welcome to cut this out if this is not, appropriate or whatever. But my website is getting ready to launch, and I will be working with adoptees like one-on-one. And it doesn't exist until I said it did, but it's called an adoptee doula. And it's a woman, a man, an adoptee that works with other adoptees. And, the big plan in the works is, to have a bunch of adoptee doulas that can talk to other adoptees, because one day you wake up and you realize your adoption actually matters. And, I'm sure you've heard the term coming out of the fog, which is like, all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, like I need to address a little bit of this, stop sweeping it under the rug. And I don't know when that happens. It's different for everyone, but I think I'd love for people to read the story and go, oh my gosh, me too. Or hear a podcast and think, I don't have a good memory. Even the smallest little things that you can relate, to, that someone else is openly speaking about, and then to connect, whether it's with me or with another adoptee, it's so helpful. And I wish it was like offered to people, like out in the open, a therapist that's adopted, or a counselor that's adopted, or someone just to hold your hand, a doula, a one-on-one person that can call and check on you. And that's sort of the goal here is, and I'm excited about it. It's got some work. We've got some time and work to do, but that's the goal, hopefully, is that people understand they're not by themselves in this. And again, open adoption doesn't create quite the problem as when we closed adoptees wake up and go, but open adoption equally, I think there's a lot of things that adoptive parents can do for their kids or adolescents. Kids are tricky. You're just trying to survive having kids. But adolescence, and when things start to matter a little bit, when your brain is growing up, and support, and put them in a room with another adoptee, just to like talk about it. And I just wish services were offered openly, and it wasn't like hush hush, and it wasn't because some explosion happened or because you got this text. I just wish it was openly offered, through agencies or through anyone that kind of advocates for adoptees, adult adoptees, I think. So
I love that.
Hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, trying to make your story into something good, like, wouldn't it be great if we all just honestly spoke about our lives and connected with people on that Instagram? I have a love-hate relationship. There's so much out there that people relate to that isn't even, reasonable or realistic. And so if you can take a story like this and make it into something great, I'm here for it. That's what I want to do.
That's beautiful. I love it. Cool. All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about today?
I don't think so. You got me. You touched on everything, I think. Thank you for letting me share and kind of be here for it. And I just had a great time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for being vulnerable. I know that's hard. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is to, be able to talk to people about it. If they can just take one thing away, if I affected one person, I feel like if we all lived our life trying to affect one person at a time, that would be a great way, to spread joy.
I love that. Well, Mary, thank you so much for being here
This was so fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Open Adoption Project. We want to sincerely thank Mary for being on the podcast with us. We are so grateful for her vulnerability and opening up and sharing so much of her personal story and just her thoughts and the experiences that she's had as an adoptee.
I really love her focus on trying to help other adoptees as well with coping with the different traumas and experiences they've had as adoptees. And I love her kindness and how she talks about others in her story and the grace that she shows everybody. She was wonderful to talk to and had such a beautiful story, and we hope that you really enjoyed it.
For me as an adoptive parent, it just kept highlighting over and over for me that I just need to make sure that we have a lot of dialogue between us and our children and about how they're feeling toward adoption. And I have to be okay and realize that sometimes they might not feel great about adoption, but I need to be a safe place where they can voice their concerns or any problems or any thoughts that they're having in a safe way so that we can process through those feelings together.
Yeah, and be a support to them. I love that. That resonated with me too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Open Adoption Project. If you want to check out our website, it is openadoptionproject.org. And we'll be back next week with another episode where we'll be hearing from a birth mother and her perspective and story.
If you could take just a moment and jump onto Apple Podcast and leave us a 5-star review and some thoughts about the podcast, we'd really appreciate that. As you might know, as people search for podcasts, typically those that have more reviews or higher reviews are those that will show up first. And we, as a couple, have tried really hard to put together a great resource for members of the adoption community in this podcast, and we would love for more people to be able to find it. So if you could do that for us, we'd really appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Open Adoption Project.